The grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon should have been the easiest errand in the world. It was the kind of gray November day that settles over southern Ontario like a wet blanket. Not cold enough to be dramatic, just cold enough to be miserable. The parking lot of the Fresh Mart on Dunlop Street was half empty, slush from the weekend's first real snowfalls, still pushed up against the curbs in dirty gray piles. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed the way they always did, indifferent to everything happening beneath them. Near the deli counter, a woman stood very still in the middle of a moving crowd. Her name was Adrienne Marsh. She was 37 years old, and she had a list in her hand. A real paper list. The kind you write out the night before, when you're too exhausted to trust your own memory. She'd been awake since 5:30 that morning. She'd packed a lunch for her 6-year-old son, Theo, driven him to school in a car that needed new brake pads, worked a full shift at the dry cleaners on Bayfield, picked Theo up, dropped him at her neighbor Paulette's, and driven back out because they were out of practically everything, and payday was still 2 days away, and she'd calculated twice, with a calculator, that she had exactly $43 to make it work. Adrienne had a mild tremor in both hands. It had started about 2 years ago, after a period of sustained stress that her doctor described with clinical understatement as not ideal. It wasn't visible unless you were looking for it, or unless Adrienne was anxious, or tired, or both, which, lately, was most of the time. She'd learned to hold things with both hands. She'd learned to set her phone flat on the counter when she typed. She'd learned 100 small adjustments that no one around her ever noticed. Which was precisely how she preferred it. What she hadn't quite learned to manage yet was the deli counter at peak hour. When the woman behind it spoke quickly, and the ticket machine printed numbers and you were supposed to call out what you wanted across a glass case full of meats while 4 other people stood right behind you and your hands were shaking. And your ticket said 47. And they just called 47. And everyone was waiting. Next, Adrienne stepped forward. She opened her mouth. Number 47, the woman behind the counter. Her name tag said Bev, and she had the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this for 20 years. Glanced up with a professionally pleasant expression. Hi, yes. Could I get? Adrienne's list shook slightly in her hand. She pressed it flat against the glass case. The sliced turkey, please. The oven roasted. About 200 grams. 200 of the oven roasted turkey, sure. Bev reached for the tongs. Anything else? And Adrienne squinted at her list. The words blurred slightly. She hadn't eaten since 10 that morning, and the fluorescent lights were doing something unkind to her vision. Sorry. The Black Forest ham. Just 100 grams. It's for my son only eats it if it's the Black Forest kind. Someone behind her shifted their weight audibly. No rush, Bev said, though her hands were already moving, already wrapping the turkey in the efficient way of someone conscious of the line behind her. Adrienne felt the line behind her the way you feel weather changing. A pressure, a coolness. She heard a man exhale. Not a sigh exactly. Just a breath released with a specific quality that communicated, without words, that he had somewhere to be and this was in his way. Her hands trembled. She pressed them harder against the glass case, and the list crinkled, and she suddenly couldn't remember if she wanted 100 grams of the ham or 150, and her calculator math started coming apart in her head. $43, minus the bread, minus the milk, minus the juice box. Theo only drank the grape kind, not the apple. She'd made that mistake at last June, and the man behind her exhaled again, and Adrienne felt something familiar climb up the back of her neck. She almost put the list in her pocket and walked away. She'd done it before. Stood in a line somewhere. A bank, a pharmacy, a coffee shop. Felt the collective impatience of the people behind her like a physical weight. And quietly stepped aside and said she'd come back. And then driven home and sat in her car in the parking lot of her apartment building for 10 minutes before she could go inside and face Theo and make dinner with whatever was already in the cupboard. It was the kind of retreat you didn't talk about. The kind that left a mark. But then, from somewhere to her left, came the sound of a small voice. Dad. Dad, look. Adrienne didn't turn. She was focused on her list, on her hands, on getting through the next 30 seconds. That lady's hands are shaking, the voice said, quieter now. A child, maybe 8 or 9 by the sound of it. Is she okay? A pause. Then a man's voice, low and even. I don't know, buddy. Why don't we find out? Adrienne heard footsteps. Then someone appeared at her side. Not behind her, not looming, but beside her, as if he'd simply come to look at the same cheese counter. As if this were the most natural thing in the world. He was a tall man, maybe 40, with the kind of face that had some weather in it. Not handsome in a magazine way, but the sort of face that looked like it had made some hard decisions and come out reasonably intact. He wore a gray fleece and work boots that had actually seen work. He glanced at her once. Not a pitying glance, not a startled one, just an assessing one, the way you look at someone when you're trying to understand what they need. Hey, he said quietly, not loudly. Not so the whole deli could hear. Adrienne looked at him. I'm not trying to jump the line or anything, he said. It looked like maybe you were having a rough minute. Do you want a hand? Behind Adrienne, someone made a small noise of impatience. The man glanced back at them, very briefly, with an expression that communicated absolutely nothing except that he had noticed them, and was not particularly concerned. Then he looked back at Adrienne. I'm fine, Adrienne said automatically. She'd been saying that for 2 years. Okay, the man said, simply. He didn't argue, he didn't push. He just stood there, easy and unhurried, in a way that somehow made the line behind her feel farther away. Adrienne looked at her list. Then, without quite deciding to, she said, I can't remember if I wanted 100 grams of the ham or 150. I was trying to stay under budget and I lost track. The man nodded, as if this were a completely reasonable thing to say to a stranger. What does 100 grams run you here? About $2.50, $3, $2.89. And 150? $4.30, I think. Is the difference gonna matter tonight? Adrienne thought about the $43. Bread, the milk, the grape juice boxes. Yeah, she said, it kind of will. Then 100 grams is the right call, he said, just like that. Matter of fact, no judgment in it, as if helping a stranger do grocery math was something he did every Tuesday. Adrienne turned back to the counter. Bev was waiting with the patient expression of someone who had seen everything and been surprised by nothing. 100 grams of the Black Forest ham? She confirmed. Yes, please, Adrienne said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. The man stayed where he was while Bev wrapped the ham. Not hovering, not watching, just present, the way a good wall is present when you need to lean against something for a second. His name was Garrett Lowe. He was 41. He had a son named Seb, short for Sebastian, who was 9 years old and currently standing about 3 feet away holding a number ticket for the deli counter and watching his father with an expression of complete calm. As if this were exactly the kind of thing his dad did, as if it were simply part of the Tuesday errand routine. Adrienne would learn all of this later. In the moment, she only knew that her hands had stopped shaking quite so badly, and that the man to her left had made no demands on her and asked for nothing, and had somehow, without any fanfare, made the last 2 minutes survivable. She took her packages from Bev. She started to turn away. Hey, the man said. You've got one more thing on your list. Adrienne looked down. She'd been gripping the paper so tightly it had creased. She smoothed it out, there at the bottom, written in her own handwriting from the night before. Shredded mozzarella, store brand if they have it. She exhaled slowly. Right, cheese is the next aisle over, he said. If you're heading that way. She nodded, and then, because she wasn't entirely sure why, she said, thank you, I mean it, you didn't have to do that. The man shrugged the way people shrug when something is genuinely not a big deal to them. You were managing fine, he said. I just stood next to you for a minute. That sentence would stay with her for a long time afterward. She found the shredded mozzarella. She found the bread, the store brand, not the nice kind, and the 2% milk and the grape juice boxes. She did the math in her head 3 more times, standing in the middle of the cereal aisle with her phone calculator pulled up, and when she got to the checkout she was at $41.60 and she had done it, she had made it work. And something about that felt enormous and ridiculous and real all at once. She was loading her bags into her cart when she heard small footsteps and looked up. The boy, Seb, though she didn't know his name yet, was standing in front of her cart with the specific directness of a child who has decided to speak to an adult and is not going to waste time approaching it indirectly. My dad says you did good, he announced. Behind him, Garrett had appeared at the end of the checkout lane, and he had the expression of a man who had not told his son to say that and who was experiencing a specific kind of fatherly mortification. Buddy, he didn't actually say that, Seb continued, unperturbed. But I could tell. He cocked his head slightly. We do grocery math too, me and my dad, every time. He makes me do it in my head. Adrienne looked at the boy. He had his father's directness, and dark eyes, and the manner of someone who had been raised to take people seriously. My son makes me write it on paper, she said. He doesn't trust my mental math. Seb appeared to find this deeply reasonable. How old is your son? 6, I'm 9, Seb said as if this established something important. 6 is good though, he'd agree with you. Seb nodded. He seemed satisfied. He turned and walked back to his father, apparently having resolved whatever he'd come to resolve. Garrett caught her eye briefly with an expression that was half apology, half something else, warmth maybe, or just the tired recognition of one single parent to another. He gave a small nod. Adrienne nodded back. She pushed her cart toward the door. Outside, the November air hit her like a flat hand, and she stood for a moment in the slushy parking lot, with her bags in the cart, and her list folded in her jacket pocket, and her hand still. Completely still. She noticed that. She stood there noticing it for a moment, the way you sometimes notice the absence of pain, after carrying it around so long that its absence becomes almost a physical thing. She thought about the man at the deli counter. How he hadn't tried to fix her. Hadn't made a project of her. Hadn't looked at her trembling hands with that particular expression people sometimes wore. A compound of pity and discomfort, the expression that made her want to apologize for existing at that moment in that form. He'd just stood next to her and talked to her like a person who was having a hard Tuesday, which is exactly what she was. She drove back to Paulette's and picked up Theo, who was 6 years old and had his father's dark hair and Adrienne's stubborn set to his jaw. And who had opinions about everything and was never shy about them. He climbed into the back seat and reported, in the manner of a regional correspondent, everything that had happened at Paulette's house since 3:15, including the fact that Paulette's cat, Gerald, had knocked a glass off the counter and not even looked apologetic about it. I made a list, Theo told her as she pulled out of Paulette's driveway. Of what? Of stuff I want to tell you. He produced a small piece of paper. He had gotten very into lists lately, following her example, which she found touching in a way she couldn't entirely articulate. Number 1. Gerald knocked a glass. Number 2. Paulette let me have 2 cookies and said not to tell you. Number 3. I love you. Adrienne stopped at a red light and looked at him in the rearview mirror. You love me is number 3, she said. Theo shrugged, serene. I saved the important one for last. She laughed, a real laugh, uncomplicated, the kind she didn't always have access to at the end of a long Tuesday. It filled the car in a way that felt disproportionate to the cause, which was fine. There was no rule about that. At home, while Theo watched 20 minutes of television, she allowed it. On Tuesdays, as a matter of personal policy, Adrienne unpacked the groceries. Turkey. Ham. The good kind for Theo, the 100 grams, the right call. Bread, milk, juice boxes with the grape label. Store-brand mozzarella, which she was going to use for the homemade pizza they made every Friday because it was cheaper than ordering, and Theo liked putting the toppings on himself. She put the list on the counter when she was done. There was a small crease through the middle from where she'd gripped it too hard. She smoothed it out and left it there. She wasn't sure why. It felt like something worth keeping for a minute, evidence that she had done the thing, that she had calculated and managed and held her ground and come home with exactly what her family needed. She had just put the empty bags in the cupboard under the sink when her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't open it. Hi, this is Garrett from the grocery store. I got your number from Paulette. She's my mom's neighbor. I hope that's okay. I just wanted to say that Seb is still talking about you, by the way. He said, and I quote, she had a list too, Dad. She's smart. Coming from him, that's a significant compliment. Adrienne read the message twice, then she sat down at the kitchen table and read it a third time, slowly. Paulette, she thought. Of course, Paulette. Knew everyone in a 6-block radius and had for 40 years. And this was the kind of thing Paulette considered not interference, but simply the responsible management of the neighborhood social fabric. She thought about what to write back. She drafted several things in her head. Something polite and neutral, something gracious but distant. Something that acknowledged the coincidence without leaning into it. What she actually wrote was, your son is a good kid. He told me you make him do grocery math in his head. Tell him my son would be impressed. The reply came back in under 2 minutes. I'll pass it along. He'll want to know the other kid's name. Adrienne smiled at her phone. Theo, she wrote. Good name. Came back. Seb says hello to Theo. Adrienne looked up from her phone. Through the kitchen doorway she could see Theo on the couch, one sock half off. Entirely absorbed in whatever he was watching, his hair a particular variety of chaos that happened every day between 3 and 7 p.m. and could not be influenced by combing. He was fine. She was fine. The groceries were put away and the list was done, and she was sitting at her own kitchen table with all $43 accounted for, and her hands resting quiet on the tabletop. She had been having a very hard 2 years. The tremor, the separation, the dry cleaner job, which was fine, she was genuinely fine with it. But it was not what she'd been doing before Theo was born and not what she'd imagined for herself at 37. The constant arithmetic of single-parent life, not just the money arithmetic, though that was relentless, but the other kind, the time arithmetic, the energy arithmetic, the calculation of what you could afford to feel and when. She had gotten very good at all of it. She had also gotten very tired. She didn't need anyone to fix any of it. She knew that. She had never been looking for someone to fix it. But today, for about 4 minutes in the deli aisle of the Fresh Mart on Dunlop Street, A man she didn't know had stood beside her and talked to her like a person and not a problem. And his 9-year-old son had walked up to her cart afterward and told her she'd done good without even being told to, because apparently that was just the kind of child his father was raising. And Adrienne, who was 37 years old and tired and careful and capable and trying very hard, found that it mattered. More than she would have predicted. In a part of her she hadn't let herself look at in a while. She put her face down on the table. She got up. She started on dinner. Later that night, after Theo was asleep, he fell asleep quickly and completely, the way children do when they have been thoroughly used up by the day. Adrienne sat on the edge of her bed and opened the Notes app on her phone. She used it sometimes to write things down when she didn't want to lose them. Not journal entries exactly. Just observations. Things that had struck her. She typed, "A stranger stood next to me today when my hands were shaking and he didn't make it into anything. He just stood there. I forgot what that felt like." She read it back. Then she added, "His kid says Theo is a good name. I think he's right." She put her phone on the nightstand and turned off the light. The apartment was quiet. The fridge hummed. Somewhere outside a car moved through the slush on the street, and then it was gone, and the quiet came back. And Adrienne lay in the dark, and thought about almost walking away from the deli counter. About the paper list in her pocket. About a boy named Seb who had walked up to a stranger's grocery cart, with the simple conviction that she had done good, and that this was worth saying, out loud. She fell asleep before she finished the thought. In the morning, there was school and lunches, and the parking lot and Paulette and the dry cleaner, and all of it again, the whole Tuesday-shaped machinery of her life, and she moved through it the way she always did, efficiently and without complaint. Because that was what you did. But the list was still on the kitchen counter when she got home. She'd meant to recycle it. Instead, she folded it once, neatly, and put it in the small ceramic dish by the door where she kept her keys and Theo's library card and the things she wanted to remember she had. 3 weeks later, she met Garrett for coffee. His suggestion, cautious and specific. "Just coffee if that's okay. There's a place on Penetanguishene Road that Seb approves of," which she found, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, very charming. Seb had apparently been consulted on the venue. He had opinions. She brought Theo. Garrett brought Seb. The two boys sized each other up for approximately 45 seconds before Seb asked Theo if he knew how to do multiplication yet, and Theo said no, but he was very good at lists, and Seb said that was actually more useful. And they were fine after that, completely fine, eating muffins on the same side of the table while their parents sat across from them and talked in the careful way of adults who are trying to be honest and not quite sure yet how much of themselves to bring. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand rescue or a transformation or a story with a clean lesson printed at the end. It was just two tired people who had both learned to do the math and make it work, sitting across from each other in a coffee shop while their sons argued, cheerfully, about whether grape juice boxes were better than apple. Theo maintained that grape was correct. Seb said apple. They agreed to disagree. Tide. The first real snow of the season was starting to fall. Not slush this time, but the clean, dry, serious kind that settles without apology and stays. It covered the parking lot and the cars and the curbs, and it kept falling, quiet and indifferent, the way November snow does, as if it has somewhere to be and all the time in the world. And inside, at a table by the window, 2 kids were being loud and 2 people were being careful, and nobody was fixing anything, and it was exactly enough.